For 11 seasons, The Carol Burnett Show looked like the warmest room on television. A live audience, a cast that genuinely seemed to love each other, and a host who closed every single episode by tugging her own ear. But warmth makes good television and bad headlines, so most of what actually happened behind that curtain never made into highlight reels. Lawsuits, buried footage, a feud with one of Hollywood's biggest stars, a replacement actor the network quietly tried to forget. Here are 7 things about The Carol Burnett Show that took decades to come fully into the light. Secret number 1 is the lawsuit that almost never happened because Carol Burnett almost let it go. In 1976, the National Enquirer ran an item claiming she'd gotten drunk at a Washington restaurant and gotten into a loud, public argument with Henry Kissinger, then the U.S. Secretary of State. None of it was true. Burnett hadn't been drunk, hadn't argued with Kissinger, and had barely had a drink that night at all. Most celebrities in that era simply absorbed stories like this. Tabloids were considered a cost of doing business, and suing one was seen as a losing fight nobody won. Burnett sued anyway. The case dragged on for years and became a landmark moment in tabloid journalism, with a jury eventually awarding her millions in damages. Later reduced on appeal, but still one of the first major wins by a celebrity against a supermarket tabloid. It changed how outlets like the Enquirer operated, if only a little, and it cemented Burnett's reputation as someone who would not simply let a lie sit there, because fighting it was inconvenient. Secret number 2 involves Cary Grant, and it has nothing to do with anything that happened on set. At a Hollywood dinner party sometime in the 1970s, Grant cornered Burnett and told her, bluntly, that he hated the family. The recurring sketch about a squabbling, dysfunctional working-class household that would later spin off into the sitcom Mama's Family. His complaint wasn't really about jokes landing or not landing. He found the characters ugly and constantly yelling, with nothing redeeming about any of them. It's a strange footnote, mostly because the family went on to become one of the most beloved recurring bits in the show's history. Proof that even legends can be completely wrong about what audiences will love. Secret number 3 is what the family actually was before it became lovable. The sketch's origins trace back to a much darker piece called The Reunion, in which Roddy McDowall played a younger brother returning home after winning a Pulitzer Prize, only to find his family exactly as miserable and cutting as he'd left them. The characters in that earlier version weren't comic relief grumps. They were genuinely mean, written with an edge that's closer to real family dysfunction than sitcom fodder. The version that made it to series, and eventually to Mama's Family, was softened considerably. The original cut, by most accounts, was sharper and uglier than anything CBS ultimately wanted in front of a live studio audience. Secret number 4 is the time Carol Burnett said no to one of the biggest stars in the world. Bette Davis was approached about a guest appearance on the show, and by most accounts, she balked at the offered salary and pushed for more money. Burnett didn't budge. She made the decision to simply withdraw the invitation rather than set a precedent that any big enough name could renegotiate her show's pay structure on the spot. It cost her a guest spot that would have generated real buzz. It also meant that for 11 seasons, almost nobody, A-list or otherwise, got to walk onto that stage by leveraging their fame against her budget. Secret number 5 is about the seasons of the show that, for decades, almost nobody could legally watch. Because of a prolonged legal dispute with the original production company, Bob Banner Associates, the first 5 seasons of The Carol Burnett Show, over 100 episodes, were locked out of syndication and home media for years. While later seasons aired constantly in reruns under the title Carol Burnett and Friends, that early material essentially vanished from public view. It wasn't until a 2015 DVD release, billed as The Lost Episodes, that most fans got their first real look at the show's earliest years and decades. An entire chunk of the show's history had effectively been buried by paperwork, not by choice. Secret number 6 is the replacement nobody wanted to talk about afterward. When Harvey Korman left the show in 1977 to pursue other projects, the producers needed someone with comparable star power, and they landed one of the biggest names available, Dick Van Dyke. On paper, it looked like a guaranteed win. In practice, it wasn't. Audiences never fully connected with Van Dyke and Corman's old slots, and the chemistry that had taken a decade to build between Burnett and Corman simply didn't transfer. Van Dyke left after only 10 episodes, and the show largely moved on without dwelling on the experiment. It's rarely mentioned in retrospectives, mostly because it didn't fail loudly. It just quietly didn't work, and everyone involved seemed content to let it fade. Secret number 7 brings us back to Corman himself, and to the one night the show's easy camaraderie genuinely broke down. During season 7, Corman showed up to rehearsal in a foul mood and was openly rude to that week's guests, Tim Conway and singer Petula Clark. Burnett confronted him afterward. He told her to back off, and the exchange ended with him shutting his dressing room door in her face. Burnett did something she'd never done before. She called his agent and told him Corman was off the show. When she went back to deliver the news herself, Corman asked if there was anything he could do to fix it. She told him she wanted him cheerful, every day, no exceptions. He agreed, and the following Monday, he greeted her by literally skipping down the hallway, whistling. She had a plaque made for his door that read, "Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky." It's one of the only documented moments of real conflict between the two of them in 11 years of working together, and it ended, notably, with a joke rather than a grudge. What ties all 7 of these together isn't scandal for its own sake. It's the gap between how effortless a show looked on screen and how much deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable work went into keeping it that way. Lawsuits fought when it would have been easier not to, casting risks that didn't pan out, sketches softened before they reached air, and at least one full-blown confrontation handled quickly enough that almost nobody outside that dressing room ever knew it happened. None of it diminishes what the show became. If anything, knowing what it took makes 11 seasons of effortless-looking comedy a little harder to take for granted. Production notes. Runtime estimate assumes narration pace of roughly 145 words per minute with natural pauses for visuals and archival clips. Recommended visuals per segment. National Enquirer headline mock-ups or court reporting for 1976 to 1981 if available. A still of Cary Grant alongside the family sketch footage. Comparison stills of the reunion sketch versus the softened family version. Any available stills of Bette Davis from the era. DVD cover art for the Lost Episodes box set. Stills of Dick Van Dyke's brief run on the show. And archival clips of Corman and Burnett together for the closing segment. Several claims here draw on Burnett's 2016 memoir and contemporaneous reporting on the National Enquirer case. Citing those sources on screen, lower third, or end card is recommended for credibility.